Hi guys, how you doing today? My name's Coda, and my refutation of speech was on combustion engines are more eco-friendly than electric cars. And when you first think about it, you're like, that sounds dumb because electric cars sound way more eco-friendly. His points were fossil fuels and natural gas are still being used. Electric cars are energy intensive and battery production pollutes. With air pollution as a direct effect from from combustion engines and its emissions, companies have tried to make the cars cleaner for their environment. A new type of car that is trying to change the world and its pollution is the all-electric car. My proposition is electric cars are a long-term goal for the eco-friendliness. My first point is electric cars are for long-term. He states that our batteries are very energy intensive, and this is very true because the batteries are a lot more powerful than any combustion engine batteries. These have to power the whole engine. These are the engine. Here they do the AC. They plug in your phone. This is so it does. He's correct about making it. It takes a lot more energy to make. But after that energy, after it's made, it doesn't give off as more pollution as a combustion engine. It does a lot of pollution in the beginning and then it stops. So it's very, very iffy. You know what I mean? It's like not 1-to-1 yet, but that's what they're trying to make. And there's a study. Electric cars are. He put natural gas are still being used, and this is true because electric cars do take up natural gases and fossil fuels, and this is from charging the cars. So when you charge your car, you get that electricity from a power plant. So it is technically using the fossil fuels and natural gases, but the Department of Energy did a study on types of cars' usage of CO2, and they saw that regular cars used about 11,000 pounds of CO2 annually versus the all-electric car using only 4,000 pounds. So that's half of, or about half of around cars do. So if we cut down CO2 by half, that is pretty substantial. And the thing about electric cars, once we get into the future, we don't need to be relying on the power plants for energy. We can use solar energy, wind power, and other renewable energies. And this goes to my second claim. Electric vehicles produce zero emission after production. First we gotta know what emissions are. So there's two different types of emissions: direct emissions and life cycle emissions. Direct emissions is a type of emissions that you get from your tailpipe thing you see that comes out. Hopefully it's not black, but the type that is given off is nitric oxygen, greenhouse gases, and primarily carbon dioxide. And then life cycle emissions. He states that the cars give off emissions throughout the car's life, and this is it is true, but it's a different type of emissions. Life cycle emissions are all emissions that are used to market to make a product. So this comes from a truck moving the truck, distribution, that it's all that gas that does that, and then the machines that it takes. So it's everything around it. So it's very hard to determine how much it uses. The Department of Energy states the life cycle emissions are as all emissions related to fuel and vehicle production, processing, distribution, use, and recycle and disposal. So it's very hard to see because everything takes emission. It can be from our clothes that has taken emission from distributing it from another place. So, the Department of Energy stated that showed that it says, all electric vehicles produce zero direct emission. That's a big quote on it. It shows, but it does say that it gives a lot of life cycle emission. And this goes to my third point. This is just the beginning of electric cars. When combustion engines first started, they were really not eco-friendly. They were giving out black smoke and really polluted the air. But once the cars got really popular, companies started putting more money into them, making them better, making them more fuel efficient, and safer for the environment. Then the government stepped in and they put in laws and for eco-friendliness and fuel-efficient cars. I think we all know about the smog check, how you have to get your car smog checked. That's a law that we put in 1997. Smog inspections are required for all vehicles except for gasoline-powered vehicles from 1975. And the whole thing is electric cars are going to be for the future, and we need to know that this is just a process, and then that the step that we're taking, it takes a little bit more energy to make than normal cars, but it's going to be better in the future because, as we see in the past, they fixed the super smoggy cars to less smog from now, and they're actually doing that in Formula One racing. They are doing they're taking out less gas in the car, so most of those F1 companies need to make their cars all electric. And in conclusion, electric cars are a long-term goal for the eco-friendliest. Yes, the battery takes a lot of energy to make, but once it's finished, they give out no further emissions. The world will adapt and make electric cars even more eco-friendly, making the world cleaner and safer. Thank you.
Is that an Itachi sticker?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Thanks.
I almost thought it was Spider-Man with a ninja sword.
It's a sad story.
Do there exist Spider-Man stickers for Mac?
You can get anything on the internet. Give it to me. How bad?
No, it's good. It was fine. You have the same tendency that I've seen in several of the other speakers, and that is to kind of couch your arguments in a separate set of claims, even though they are responsive to the arguments that are being presented by the other side. Which we'll want you to do when we get to the debates. You're going to create your own disadvantage arguments, for instance, or workability arguments, and you create a separate structure, and then you contrast those points to what the other side is saying. But here, we're kind of looking for something that's a little bit more direct most of the time. And I think your arguments do directly answer some of the points that are being presented, but the language that people are using really suggests like, well, Now let me talk about my second point, my third point, my fourth point. I'm going, why are you talking about your point? You're supposed to be talking about their point. Tell me what your point does to their point. How contrast this argument to the one that the other side is making. There's usually that element to what is going on here, but it's just the phrasing that is, I think, a little bit problematic. I don't think that it was very clear at the beginning how you were talking about this. The long-term issue of how much pollution comes out, it does kind of get discussed later on when you're talking about the life cycle emission versus the direct emissions. That's something that probably could have been discussed early in the presentation, because that's the same sort of thing that's going on with the air pollution thing and the batteries that you're talking about on that first point. So it is the same kind of argument that's being made there, that over the life cycle you do get pollution, but in electric vehicles it's all front-loaded to the manufacturing process, and then over the rest of the life there's almost zero emissions. And you're contrasting that with the internal combustion engines, which, by the way, I never get any explanation of what their manufacturing costs are, how much less they are than the electric vehicles at the beginning, but we know over the lifetime that they do generate a huge amount of those kinds of things. And you did have a little comparison that provided that, the 11,000 pounds versus the 4,000 pounds. I thought that was a pretty effective way of doing that. Although earlier you'd said it's not yet one-to-one, and I'm going, okay, wait a second. So there's something that's going on here. Part of the argument is probably about the manufacturing process, and then this part of the argument is probably about the long-term production of emissions, or as you said in the second point, direct emissions. I think that needed to be a little bit clearer. Once you got to the second point, everything was a lot clearer. I thought that you basically said the electric vehicles have zero emissions after we get to what we would call the life cycle. It's direct emissions are the internal combustion engine. That's what's going on for most of the life of the vehicle, and that's a problem. You don't quantify it the same way you did on the first point, but I think the evidence on the first point does that quantification for you. And then on the third point, it really sounds to me like you're just drawing an analogy here that suggests that technological improvements are going to fix whatever issues there are here, just as they did with the internal combustion engine. We're going to have the same kind of results with electric vehicles, and so judging them by their current status instead of their future status is problematic, and we need to look at it in that context. I thought that was a pretty reasonable argument.
All right, thank you.